Daniel had always dreamed of owning a home that truly belonged to him. For years he had lived in rented apartments, moving from one busy neighborhood to another, always bound by strict rules of landlords or management offices. His dream was simple: a house where he could plant his own flowers, paint the walls the color he liked, and sit on the porch at sunset without anyone telling him what was allowed and what was not. After many months of searching, Daniel finally found it. It was a modest, charming house located just on the edge of a quiet neighborhood. The front yard was wide, with enough space for a small garden. The porch had wooden railings that needed a bit of paint, but Daniel could already imagine himself sitting there with a cup of coffee in the morning. The backyard had tall trees that whispered in the wind, giving the house a calm, private feeling. The biggest relief of all was this: the house was not part of a homeowners association, commonly known as HOA. Daniel had heard enough stories about HOAs controlling even the smallest details of a homeowner's life, like the height of the grass, the design of the mailbox, and even the number of cars that could be parked outside. He wanted freedom, not endless rules. So when the realtor confirmed that this property was outside the HOA's control, Daniel smiled with satisfaction. On the day of closing, as he signed the final papers, his heart felt light. Years of saving, hard work, and sacrifice had brought him here. This was his reward. As he drove his small moving truck to the new house, the late afternoon sun glowed warmly across the quiet street. He hummed softly to himself, already imagining how life would feel here, peaceful, steady, and truly his. But peace was not waiting for him. Across the street, behind neatly trimmed hedges, lived Karen. She had been a resident of the neighborhood for over a decade and was known by everyone as the unofficial enforcer of the HOA rules. Even though she was not the president of the HOA, she behaved as if the entire community was under her command. With her clipboard in hand and sharp eyes always watching, she was quick to remind neighbors if their grass grew too long, their trash cans were left out a little late, or their paint color was not approved. To most people, she was a source of irritation, but few dared to challenge her. Karen was loud, relentless, and always claimed to know the rules. Her voice often echoed across the street, scolding someone for breaking what she believed was proper order. So when Karen saw Daniel's moving truck pull up to the house next door, her eyes narrowed. She had heard rumors that the property had been sold, but she never imagined someone would actually move in, especially someone outside of her precious HOA. To her, every house in sight of her own should fall under her control. The thought that a neighbor could live freely, without answering to her or the HOA, filled her with anger. Daniel, unaware of the storm he was about to face, stepped out of his truck with a wide smile. He carried his first box toward the porch, feeling proud. This was the first step of his new life. "Excuse me." The sudden sharp voice startled him. Daniel turned to see a woman in her late 50s wearing a stiff expression, walking briskly toward him. Her arms were folded tightly and her eyes glared as if she had already decided he was guilty of something. "Yes?" Daniel asked politely, setting the box down. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. Daniel blinked. "I'm moving in. This is my house now." Karen shook her head quickly, almost laughing at his words. No, that can't be right. This is an HOA neighborhood. You can't just move into that property. It has to go through approval. Daniel tried to keep his tone calm. "Actually, this house isn't part of your HOA. The realtor made that very clear to me before I bought it." Karen's face turned red, her lips tightening. "That's impossible. Every house here must follow the HOA. Do you think you're special? Do you think you can just live here without permission?" Daniel frowned slightly. He didn't want conflict, but he also knew his rights. "Ma'am, I signed the papers." "This is my home. I'm not under your HOA." Karen took a step closer, pointing toward the street. "Listen to me. This is my neighborhood. I've lived here for 12 years. I know every single house, and I'll tell you this: you can't live here without following the rules. I'll call the HOA board. I'll call the city. I'll even call the county if I have to. You'll see. You won't last here." Her voice rose so loudly that a few neighbors peeked through their curtains. Curtains moved quickly. Whispers spread from one house to another. Some children stopped playing on their bikes and stared with wide eyes. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He had dreamed of this day being filled with happiness and peace, but instead, his very first moments in his new home were filled with shouting. He picked up the box again and said quietly, "I don't want trouble. I'm just here to live peacefully, that's all." But Karen was not finished. "You can't live peacefully if you're breaking the rules," she snapped. "I've seen people like you before. Think you're too good for the HOA. Think you can do whatever you want. Well, not next to me. Not next to my house." With that, she turned sharply and stormed back across her lawn, muttering under her breath. Daniel stood frozen for a moment, wondering what he had gotten himself into. As he carried more boxes into the house, he noticed more neighbors watching. Some offered sympathetic smiles as if to say, "We're sorry about her." Others simply closed their blinds, unwilling to get involved. Inside, Daniel placed his boxes on the floor and sat down on a chair. The empty rooms echoed softly, but instead of joy, he felt a heavy weight pressing on him. He had bought this house for peace and freedom, yet within minutes of arriving, he had been told he didn't belong. The sun dipped lower, and the street grew quieter. But Daniel could still hear Karen's voice in his mind. "You can't live here. You won't last." For the first time, Daniel wondered if moving here had been a mistake. But deep inside, another feeling rose. A quiet determination. He had worked too hard for this house. He had earned it. No amount of shouting from a neighbor would take that away from him. Little did he know this was only the beginning of a long and emotional battle. Daniel woke up the next morning to the sound of birds singing in the trees behind his house. Sunlight streamed through the window, painting the room golden. For a brief moment he smiled, thinking about how wonderful it felt to wake up in his very own home. This was the dream he had worked so hard for. But the peace didn't last long. As he stepped onto the porch with a cup of coffee in hand, he noticed Karen standing in her front yard again. This time she wasn't alone. 2 other neighbors stood with her, and Karen was pointing at his house with the same sharp movements she had used the previous day. Her voice, though not as loud as before, still carried across the street. "There he is," she said the moment Daniel appeared. "That's the man I was telling you about. He bought that house without HOA approval." The 2 neighbors looked uncomfortable. One of them, an older man with kind eyes, gave Daniel a small nod, as though trying to be polite without upsetting Karen. The other neighbor simply avoided eye contact and shuffled away. Daniel took a deep breath. He refused to let his first week be ruined by someone else's anger. He raised his cup slightly toward Karen in a small gesture of peace, then went back inside. Still, he could not shake the feeling that he was already being treated like an outsider. Karen's watchful eyes over the next few days, Daniel worked hard to settle in. He unpacked boxes, arranged his furniture, and started cleaning up the yard. Every evening after work, he would change into old clothes, grab his tools, and begin trimming bushes or planting flowers near the porch. And every evening, Karen appeared. Sometimes she stood in her driveway, arms crossed, just staring at him. Other times she walked up and down the street with her clipboard writing notes. Once, Daniel even caught her pointing her phone camera at his yard, though she quickly pretended to be texting when she noticed he had seen her. It was unsettling. He had heard about difficult neighbors before, but this felt like a never-ending inspection. One evening, as Daniel watered the small garden he had started, Karen suddenly marched up to the edge of his lawn. "Your grass is too long," she said sharply. Daniel turned off the hose and faced her calmly. "It's only been a week. I just moved in. I'll mow it this weekend." Karen shook her head. "The rule says grass can't be taller than 3 inches. You're already breaking it." "But I'm not in the HOA," Daniel reminded her, keeping his voice steady. Karen's lips tightened. "That doesn't matter. This neighborhood has standards. We keep it beautiful here. If you think you can bring chaos, you're wrong. People move here because of the rules." Daniel forced a smile, though inside he felt his patience thinning. "Thank you for your concern. I'll handle it." Without another word, Karen turned and walked away. Meeting friendly neighbors. Not all neighbors were like Karen. A few days later, as Daniel was unloading groceries from his car, a woman from across the street waved at him. She looked to be in her 40s with a warm smile and a gentle presence. "Hi there," she called out. "I'm Maria. Welcome to the neighborhood." Daniel's face brightened. "Thank you. I'm Daniel. It's nice to finally meet someone." Maria crossed the street holding a small basket. "I brought you some muffins. I thought you might need a sweet break from unpacking." Daniel laughed softly. "You have no idea how much I appreciate this. As they chatted, Maria lowered her voice. I saw what happened with Karen the other day.
I'm sorry about that.
She can be intense, Daniel nodded. That's one way to put it. She seems very determined to remind me about rules that don't apply to me. Maria sighed. She's been like that for years. Most of us just ignore her. But I know it can be hard when she focuses on someone new. Don't let her ruin your happiness here. This is a good neighborhood and there are kind people too. Her words gave Daniel comfort. At least not everyone saw him as an intruder. Karen's complaint later that week, Daniel received an unexpected letter in his mailbox. It wasn't from the county or city, it was from the HOA office. The letter claimed that he was required to attend a meeting to discuss his unauthorized residency. Daniel read it twice, confused. He was not part of the HOA. Why were they contacting him? The next day, he called the number listed on the letter. Hello, this is the HOA office, a voice answered. Yes, this is Daniel. I live at 412 Maple Street. I received a letter about a meeting, but my house isn't under the HOA. There was a pause on the other end, then a sigh. Sir, you're correct. That property is outside of our association. However, we've received several complaints from one of our board members insisting that your house is in violation of our rules. Daniel almost laughed. Let me guess, Karen? Another pause. We cannot give names, but I think you already know. Daniel rubbed his forehead. So what happens now? Nothing, sir. We have no authority over your property. We will close this matter. You don't have to attend the meeting. Relief washed over Daniel. Still, the fact that Karen had gone so far as to file a complaint against him left him uneasy. This wasn't going to stop anytime soon. A small victory. That weekend, Daniel mowed his lawn, trimmed the bushes, and added fresh paint to the porch railing. He worked from morning until evening, sweat dripping down his forehead, but when he finished, the house looked even more beautiful. Standing back, he smiled proudly. This was his home. His effort made it shine. As if on cue, Karen appeared again. She looked at the freshly cut grass, the clean porch, and the flowers by the steps. For the first time, she didn't say a word. She simply glared, then turned and walked away. Daniel knew it wasn't the end. But for that one evening, he felt a small victory. A growing resolve that night as Daniel sat on the porch with a glass of water. He thought about the week he had just lived. It had been filled with stress, arguments, and unwanted attention. But it had also shown him something important. His determination was stronger than Karen's anger. He thought of Maria's kind smile, of the supportive nod from the older man on the first morning, and of the joy he felt looking at his freshly painted porch. Karen could shout, glare, and even complain to the HOA, but she couldn't take away his right to live here. This was his home, and he wasn't going anywhere. As the crickets sang and the stars began to appear, Daniel whispered to himself, this is only the beginning. I will not let her chase me away. He didn't know how many more battles were ahead, but his heart was ready. For every obstacle Karen created, he would answer with patience, strength, and quiet determination. And slowly he would show the neighborhood that he belonged, not because he followed her rules, but because he respected his home and the people around him. For now, Daniel leaned back in his chair, looked at the glowing porch light, and allowed himself to smile. The storm was still brewing, but he was no longer afraid of it. This was his new beginning. The second week in Daniel's new home started with hope. Each morning, he woke to the sound of birds outside and the gentle rustle of the trees in the backyard. He fixed small things around the house, hung new curtains, and arranged the furniture. Slowly, the once empty rooms began to feel warm, alive, and truly his. But outside, the storm called Karen was still gathering force. The note on the door one evening. After returning from work, Daniel found a folded piece of paper taped to his front door. The handwriting was sharp and rushed, the letters almost pressing through the paper. You do not belong here. Move out before it gets worse. Daniel stood silently, reading the note again and again. His chest tightened. It wasn't just Karen shouting now. This was a direct attempt to scare him. He looked around the quiet street, but no one was outside. Curtains were drawn. Lights flickered in living rooms, but the neighborhood gave no answers. He crumpled the note and carried it inside. For the first time, fear mixed with his determination. He whispered to himself, I didn't do anything wrong. I won't run away. Still, he placed the note in a drawer. Something told him he might need proof of these little battles later. Karen's gathering the next Saturday, Daniel heard voices outside his window. Curious, he peeked through the blinds. Karen was standing in her front yard with 5 other neighbors. She spoke with great energy, waving her hands in the air like a leader giving orders. "He doesn't respect our rules," she said loudly. "If we let him stay, soon this whole street will fall apart. Who knows what kind of people he'll bring here? Who knows what he'll build in his yard?" One neighbor asked quietly, "But his house isn't in the HOA, Karen. Can we really do anything?" Karen's eyes flashed. "We can make it impossible for him to enjoy living here. If he doesn't follow the rules, then he doesn't deserve to stay." Daniel felt a chill. Watching from the window, he realized that this wasn't just one angry neighbor anymore. Karen was trying to gather an army against him. A friend's support later that day, Maria came over with a small basket of cookies. Her smile was warm, but Daniel could see worry in her eyes. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. Daniel hesitated, then showed her the note he had found. Maria's face tightened with anger. "She went too far this time," Maria said firmly. "Daniel, don't let her scare you." "Most of us don't agree with her. She just speaks louder than everyone else. Please remember, you're not alone in this." Daniel nodded, grateful for her kindness. Her words felt like a hand steadying him when the ground shook. "Thank you, Maria," he said softly. "Sometimes it feels like the whole street is against me." "It's not," Maria assured. "Some people are just afraid of Karen. They don't want to be her next target. But I promise you're not alone." Small acts of resistance Karen didn't stop. Every day brought a new complaint. One morning she walked over while Daniel was washing his car. "You can't do that here," she barked. "Washing cars in driveways is against the rules," Daniel calmly replied. "Not for me. I'm not in the HOA." Her face turned red. "That's not the point. You're setting a bad example." Another evening, when Daniel placed a wooden birdhouse on his porch, Karen shouted from across the street, "That design isn't approved. Take it down immediately." Daniel only smiled and went back inside. Each time she attacked, he answered with patience. He refused to give her the satisfaction of anger. Still, inside his heart, it wasn't easy. The constant pressure weighed on him. The meeting at Maria's house one evening, Maria invited Daniel over for tea. A few other neighbors were there too, people Daniel hadn't met yet. They sat in Maria's cozy living room, sipping tea and eating biscuits. "We wanted to welcome you properly," Maria explained. "And also, to tell you something." The older man Daniel had noticed on his first day, Mr. Howard, leaned forward. "Son, don't let Karen scare you. We've all dealt with her for years. She acts like she owns the neighborhood, but truth is she doesn't. You bought your house fair and square. You belong here." Daniel's throat tightened with emotion. For the first time, he felt like he had allies. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Sometimes it feels like I'm fighting this battle alone." Maria smiled. "Not anymore. If she keeps bothering you, we'll stand by you." That night, as Daniel walked home under the soft glow of streetlights, he felt stronger. The house wasn't just a lonely building anymore. It was part of a community where kindness still lived, even if it hid behind quiet doors. Karen's last straw, but Karen wasn't finished. The very next morning, Daniel woke to the sound of hammering. He stepped outside to see Karen planting a giant, "No trespassing, HOA rules enforced" sign right at the edge of her lawn, facing his house. He walked over calmly. "Karen, what are you doing?" She didn't stop hammering. "Making sure you understand. This is an HOA neighborhood. You can't just come here and ignore us. Either you follow the rules or you leave." Daniel's patience finally cracked a little. His voice was calm but firm. "Karen, I respect your right to live under HOA rules, but I am not part of it. I will not let you decide where I belong. This is my home." Karen dropped the hammer and glared at him. "Then get ready. I'll make your life miserable until you pack your bags." The choice that night, Daniel sat on his porch staring at the quiet street. His hands trembled slightly from the stress. The note, the stairs, the complaints, the sign. It was all becoming too much. For a moment, he thought about selling the house and leaving. But then he remembered the first morning he woke up here. The sunlight warming the room, the feeling of freedom, the pride of finally having something truly his. He remembered Maria's kindness, Mr. Howard's support, and his own dream that had carried him this far. "No," he whispered to himself. "I won't run away. Not again. This is my home." The battle with Karen was only beginning, but Daniel's heart was steady now. He knew storms would come, but he would face them with strength. And slowly, He would prove that no amount of shouting could push him away from the life he had built. The stars glimmered above him, silent witnesses to his vow. Daniel was ready. The days that followed were heavy with tension. The street looked peaceful from a distance, with children riding bicycles, sprinklers watering the lawns, and birds fluttering between trees. But under that quiet surface, the battle between Daniel and Karen grew sharper with each passing hour. Daniel tried his best to focus on his work and home projects. He painted the living room walls, fixed squeaky doors, and planted roses by the front steps. He wanted to fill his house with life, to make it the dream home he had always imagined. But Karen's presence was constant, like a storm cloud hanging over every bright day. The false complaint one morning, Daniel woke to a knock at his door. When he opened it, a city inspector stood on the porch holding a clipboard. "Good morning," the inspector said politely. "We received a complaint about unpermitted construction at this property. I need to take a look." Daniel was stunned. "Construction? There's no construction here." The inspector looked around the yard, checked the porch, and walked through the backyard. After a few minutes, he shook his head. "You're right. There's nothing here that violates code. I'm sorry to bother you. Someone must have filed a false complaint." As the inspector left, Daniel glanced across the street. Karen stood on her porch, arms folded, watching with a satisfied smirk. Daniel's heart tightened. She had gone this far, calling the city on him with lies. It wasn't just annoyance anymore. It was harassment. That evening, he sat on the porch with Maria, who had stopped by after noticing the inspector's visit. "She won't stop," Daniel said quietly. "She'll keep inventing new ways to make trouble." Maria sighed. "You're right. But remember, the truth is on your side. Lies can only go so far. Eventually, people will see who's really causing problems." Daniel nodded, though the weight of stress pressed hard on his shoulders. A neighborhood divided. The following week, the neighborhood began to show cracks. Some people kept their distance from Daniel, afraid of getting involved in Karen's war. A few others, encouraged by Karen, began to avoid greeting him altogether. But there were also those who offered quiet support. Mr. Howard often waved kindly, and Maria continued to visit, sometimes bringing food or helping him plant flowers. Still, Daniel could feel the division growing. Every time he stepped outside, he sensed eyes on him, some filled with sympathy, others with suspicion. He felt like an outsider in his own home, and the loneliness pressed deeper than ever. 3. Shouting match one Saturday morning as Daniel was painting his fence, Karen stormed across the street. "That color isn't allowed," she shouted, pointing at the fresh coat of white paint. Daniel set down his brush and wiped his hands. "Karen, I've told you before. My house isn't part of the HOA. I can paint it any color I like." Karen's voice grew louder. "This neighborhood has standards. You can't just do whatever you want. If everyone ignored the rules like you, this place would be chaos." Daniel's patience finally thinned. His voice was calm but firm. "The only chaos here is you shouting at me every day. I'm not breaking any law. I'm living in my own home peacefully. You need to stop." The neighbors peeked from their windows again. Some whispered behind curtains, others came out to watch openly. The street had turned into a stage, and everyone was watching the clash between Karen and Daniel. Karen pointed at him, her face red with anger. "Mark my words, you won't last here." Daniel stood tall, refusing to look away. "I will last. Longer than your anger. Longer than your complaints. This is my home, Karen, and I'm not leaving." The silence that followed was heavy. Karen finally turned and stormed back to her house, slamming her door behind her. For the first time, some neighbors clapped softly, their quiet way of showing support. Daniel's chest filled with both relief and determination. He had spoken his truth, and people had heard it. The late-night disturbance. Few nights later, Daniel was woken by a strange sound outside, metal scraping against wood. He rushed to the window and saw shadows near his fence. His heart pounded. As he stepped outside, only to find that someone had knocked over the birdhouse he had carefully placed on his porch. The small wooden structure lay broken on the ground. He felt a sting in his chest, not just for the birdhouse, but for what it symbolized. It wasn't an accident. Someone wanted to break his spirit. The next morning, Maria saw the damage and shook her head in anger. "This has gone too far. You should report this, Daniel. It's not just annoyance anymore, it's harassment." Daniel hesitated. He didn't want to live his life in constant conflict, but Maria was right. He couldn't ignore it forever. He took photos of the broken birdhouse, the note he had kept, and even the inspector's visit record. Quietly, he began building a file of evidence. A turning point. A few days later, Daniel was walking back from the grocery store when Mr. Howard approached him. The older man placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "You remind me of myself years ago," Mr. Howard said softly. "When I first moved here, Karen tried to control me too. She shouted about my mailbox color. She complained about my flower beds. I almost sold my house because of her." Daniel looked at him with surprise. "What stopped you?" Mr. Howard smiled faintly. "I realized that leaving would only give her more power. So I stayed. And slowly people saw through her behavior. She still shouts, but she doesn't decide who belongs here. Don't give her that power, son." Those words sank deep into Daniel's heart. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was standing for anyone who had ever been bullied into silence. The community meeting, the HOA, held a community meeting one evening, and though Daniel wasn't required to attend, Maria encouraged him to come. When he walked into the small community hall, whispers spread across the room. Karen was there too, sitting at the front, her eyes sharp and watchful. The meeting began with ordinary matters: trash collection, lawn care, seasonal decorations. But soon Karen stood up. "I need to raise an important issue," she announced. "The man who bought the house next to mine is not following the neighborhood standards. He is lowering the value of all our homes." Murmurs filled the room. Some nodded, but others looked uneasy. Daniel rose to his feet. His voice was calm, steady, and clear. "I bought my house legally. It is not under the HOA. I respect this community, and I've done nothing but take care of my home. I've been shouted at, lied about, and even harassed, but I will not leave. I belong here just as much as anyone else." The room fell silent. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Maria clapped, and soon a few others joined her. Not everyone applauded, but enough did to send a message: Daniel was not alone. Karen's face burned with fury, but for the first time she had no words. The night of reflection. That night, Daniel sat on his porch under the stars. The air was cool, and the street was quiet. He thought about everything that had happened: the shouting, the notes, the false complaints, the broken birdhouse, and the meeting. It had been exhausting, but it had also revealed something important. He wasn't just fighting to keep his house. He was learning to stand up for himself, to face fear with courage, and to find strength and kindness from others. The battle wasn't over. Karen's anger would not disappear overnight, but Daniel was no longer the newcomer standing alone. He had a voice, he had allies, and he had a home worth fighting for. He looked at the stars, shining above like silent guardians, and whispered, "I will not give up. This is my home and no one can take it from me." The storm had not ended, but Daniel was ready for whatever came next. The weeks following the community meeting were tense but quieter. Karen no longer shouted as often, though her eyes still burned with frustration whenever she saw Daniel working in his yard. Daniel, however, had changed. He no longer flinched at her presence or worried constantly about what she might do next. He had discovered a strength inside himself that he didn't know existed, the strength to face conflict with calm and dignity. Small signs of support. Maria visited more frequently, bringing small gifts or helping with gardening. Mr. Howard offered advice on landscaping and even lent Daniel tools for small repairs. Slowly, other neighbors began to show quiet support, offering nods, waves, or smiles as they passed by. It was subtle, but Daniel noticed. One afternoon, as he planted tulips along the side of his porch, a young family moved in a few houses down. The parents waved and introduced themselves warmly. "We heard you've made this street look wonderful," the mother said. "We're excited to join the neighborhood." Daniel smiled. "Thank you. It's a great community. Some days are harder than others, but it's worth it." Even Karen's former allies seemed to stay silent now, unwilling to continue the campaign of tension. The balance of power was shifting slowly, but clearly. Karen's last attempt, despite the small victories, Karen was not finished. One rainy evening she appeared at Daniel's porch soaked and fuming, holding yet another letter. "This time I have proof," she shouted. "The HOA board agrees that your house shouldn't be here." "You have to leave." Daniel remained calm. He gestured for her to step under the small roof of the porch.
"Karen, let's talk quietly."
"What proof?" Karen waved the letter in his face. "The board sent this. They claim you're a problem." Daniel took the letter and read it carefully. His eyes scanned the content, noting the words that Karen had twisted or exaggerated. He took a deep breath. "This letter is just a misunderstanding. The board clearly states that my property is outside the HOA. You misrepresented the situation. The truth is that I have done nothing wrong. You can shout, but it will not change reality." Karen's voice faltered slightly. "And they said, I'm telling you the facts," Daniel replied gently. "My house is mine. You cannot force me to leave." For the first time, Karen hesitated. Her anger burned inside her, but Daniel's calm confidence created a quiet space where her shouting lost power. A community stand. The next weekend, Daniel organized a small gathering on his lawn. It wasn't formal, just coffee, lemonade, and a chance for neighbors to meet and chat. To his surprise, many came. Maria brought baked goods. Mr. Howard shared stories of the neighborhood's history, and even some quiet neighbors from previous weeks appeared. Conversations flowed, laughter rang out, and the children played freely on the grass. Karen watched from her porch, fuming, but she found herself unable to interfere. One by one, neighbors crossed the street to Daniel's side, showing with their presence that he was welcome. "You can't control everyone," Maria whispered to Daniel. "Sometimes strength comes from letting people see the truth." Daniel nodded. He felt a sense of relief washing over him. At last, it wasn't just about fighting Karen anymore. It was about building the life he wanted, with support from the community he had chosen to be a part of. Karen confronted. The following week, Karen approached Daniel one last time. Her arms were folded, but her voice lacked the fire of previous weeks. "I suppose you're staying," she said almost reluctantly. Daniel smiled gently. "Yes, I am. I respect your right to live by your rules, but I also have a right to live in my home peacefully." Karen's eyes flickered with something softer, perhaps recognition, perhaps defeat. You won't cause trouble?" she asked almost hesitantly. Daniel shook his head. "No, I only want to live my life and respect my neighbors." "That includes you." She nodded stiffly, then turned and walked back to her porch. She didn't smile, but there was no shouting either. It was a small piece, but it was enough. Building a true home with the tension easing, Daniel's days became lighter. He spent time decorating his house, planting flowers, and fixing small repairs that had been delayed. Each morning, he stepped outside without fear, knowing that he was welcome in his own home. He also began forming deeper connections with the neighbors who had quietly supported him all along. Conversations became friendships, shared gardening tips became laughter-filled afternoons, and slowly a sense of community grew. One evening, Daniel and Maria sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in warm colors. "You've done it," Maria said softly. "You've stood your ground and earned respect. This is your home truly," Daniel smiled. "I couldn't have done it without you, and the others who quietly believed in me." The symbol of triumph, Daniel looked at the small wooden birdhouse that had once been broken. He repaired it carefully and painted it in bright colors. It stood on the porch like a symbol of his resilience, a reminder that even small things mattered when standing up for what was right. When neighbors walked by, they noticed the birdhouse, the fresh flowers, and the welcoming smile on Daniel's porch. Some even stopped to compliment him, a quiet acknowledgement that he belonged here. Karen noticed too. She saw the neighborhood's approval and realized that shouting and threats could not erase the truth. Daniel had claimed his space not by fighting, but by living honestly and with patience. A peaceful evening. One late evening, Daniel sat on the porch with a cup of tea, looking out at the quiet street. The stars twinkled overhead and the air smelled faintly of flowers and fresh grass. It was peaceful, truly peaceful, for the first time in months. He reflected on the journey, the first day of arrival, the notes, the shouting, the false complaints, the broken birdhouse, the community meeting, and finally, the growing support of neighbors. Every moment had tested him, but each challenge had also built his courage. Daniel whispered softly to himself, "This is my home. I've earned it. I belong here." And for the first time, he truly believed it. Moving forward, days turned into weeks, and the neighborhood settled into a new rhythm. Karen still lived next door, still watched closely, but her anger no longer ruled the street. Daniel greeted her politely whenever their paths crossed. She didn't respond with warmth, but she didn't shout either. The other neighbors who had once stayed silent now visited more openly, sometimes bringing food, sharing advice, or simply waving. The sense of community had returned, not through fear, but through respect and understanding. Daniel planted a small tree in his yard, a symbol of growth, patience, and new beginnings. As it grew, he knew that his home was more than walls and a roof. It was a place of courage, kindness, and connection. Even Karen, in her quiet way, had learned a lesson too. Shouting and threats could not drive someone from a home they loved and deserved. And Daniel, with his heart steady and his spirit strong, finally felt what he had always dreamed of, a home where he was free, safe, and truly at peace. The street was calm again, the neighbors friendly, and Daniel knew that no matter what storms might come in the future, he had the strength to face them. The house that had once been just a dream was now a home full of life, hope, and the quiet triumph of perseverance, and that was worth every challenge he had endured.